The one-page business case. So this is where you expand that core soundbite into a simple write-up that your champions are going to use to script their message about you without you there in the room. It's 5 parts. Number 1, you're going to lead with a priority-driven headline, something that the executive is already sold on. 2, you're going to outline a sharp problem statement that shows why that priority is blocked. So that 3, you can recommend some type of non-obvious or unique approach to solving that problem, because when they do, the customer is going to unlock a specific set of outcomes, but only if they make a required investment by a specific date, and that investment is both time and people resources as well as the budget. Like, I am not exaggerating when I say the largest deal for one of our customers, it was $30 million, less than a page, white, black font, that was it. No branding, no logos, nothing.
The one page that will actually get you to give a shit. That's the title of this episode.
I freaking love it.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this episode of 30 Minutes to President's Club. My name is Armand Farouk, and I'm here with my co-host, Nick Skelski. And folks, today we have, for a round 2, it is Nate Nasralla, who, if you don't remember, has some of the best in the game business case stuff out there. He personally sold 6- and 7-figure deals with Fortune 500 companies, landing and upselling companies like Microsoft, Comcast, Anthem, and others. And now he is the CEO over at Fluint. Nick, why should people listen?
We got really deep into this concept of problem framing in this episode, which is how you can reframe the issues that you solve, the different root causes for them, as a way to open your buyer's mind to actually looking at your solution to solve it. We got into stuff around like soundbite messages, how you write forwardable emails for your champion to get you to power, the really interesting business case format, and why you should actually have an uglier business case than a pretty one. That might help you, Armand. And so if you're looking for a way to reframe problems and socialize that reframe, as well as how you help solve that problem, Nate has a very excellent episode for that.
And a 3, 2, 1, let's roll.
All right, Nate, welcome back to the show. You might remember that we start every single episode with your top 3 actionable takeaways, so let's get yours.
Number 1, sell in sound bites. These are short, snackable messages that are easy for your champions to remember and then repeat over and over again when you're not there. And it compresses your entire deal into just 4 parts that you deliver in 2 sentences. So it sounds like this: because of this change or shift in the target account, now is the time to respond with a specific approach. And when the customer does, they're going to avoid a negative outcome and unlock a positive outcome. So one quick example, let's say we sell 3Kit, which does 3D augmented reality modeling for furniture and different types of product lines. We might say to IKEA, hey, because of your shift to a smaller format store and focus on driving up digital growth, now is the time to implement 3Kit's 3D AR platform, because when you do, you're going to unlock higher rates of bundled sales in kitchen, bedroom, categories that are hard to visualize, while avoiding the $38 million in monthly revenue lost from abandoned carts.
Very nice. Well, I'm not going to abandon the next tip. So what's tip number 2?
Tip number 2, the one-page business case. So this is where you expand that core soundbite into a simple write-up that your champions are going to use to script their message about you without you there in the room. It's 5 parts. Number 1, you're going to lead with a priority-driven headline, something that the executive is already sold on. 2, you're going to outline a sharp problem statement that shows why that priority is blocked. So that 3, you can recommend some type of non-obvious or unique approach to solving that problem, because when they do, the customer is going to unlock a specific set of outcomes, but only, this is the last piece, if they make a required investment by a specific date, and that investment is both time and people resources as well as the budget.
Very nice. Round us out. What's number 3?
Number 3, write forwardable emails. This is where you deliver your messaging not by writing to your buyers, but by writing through them to make sure that they are sending your message to somebody who you need but isn't directly involved in the deal to date. The way you do this is, number 1, you're going to lead with the bottom line up front. Bluff is the rule of thumb. Second, you're going to make sure that that core ask, that need up front, links back to an existing priority for context. And then 3, you're going to show why that's important with specifics. Numbers, names, and dates are the language of the executive. And a pro tip here is always match the style of who you are writing to make sure that that message is actually forwarded along and well received.
All right, Nate, so let's dig in on this one-page business case. And for everyone listening, Nate actually gave us a template. So if you want to pull this up, it's in the show notes, and you can literally see what this looks like. So the 5 parts of it are priority-driven headline, problem statement, recommended approach, target outcomes, and then required investment. Let's start with the priority-driven headline. You used very specific language in the takeaway. You called it something that the executive is already sold on. I'm hoping that you could explain that a little bit more.
Yes, so the idea is that you need to find a source of momentum to keep your deal moving. And what already has momentum and is going to stop it from stalling out is you don't actually need to sell or persuade at all because the executive is already actively investing time and resources. This is what they are talking about as an executive leadership team to the board. And what every executive always does is when something matters to them, they create some type of shorthand phrase, a couple words, a project name, a code name that is unique to them. And so the way that you link back or create a mental bridge back from what you can do, your product, to what the executive cares about, their priority, is you want to use that language to describe the deal. So for example, let's say back in this 3-kit IKEA example that we started with earlier. So let's say the CEO of IKEA is thinking about, okay, we're falling behind Home Depot in major categories like kitchen, which are really hard to like picture and visualize online. So how are we going to do a full kitchen display when we're moving to these smaller footprint stores? Digital is the answer, but like customers abandon major projects like that. In other words, there is an imagination gap. The imagination gap, that's IKEA language to talk about what a major issue is that links back to a change in how IKEA is doing business on a fundamental level. So to close this out, your headline would read something like closing the imagination gap to drive digital order bundles.
See, that's so smart because a lot of times executives will get heartburn when they see someone acting on an initiative that they don't immediately realize ladders into one of their priorities. Whenever I tried to get a deal approved or something done internally when I was a director of sales and pitching it to my VP, I would always go to my VP, now CRO Jeff, and I would be like, remember, you always say things like, the company with the best people always wins. And then I would talk about a people investment versus if I just started with the people investment, he would be like, oh my God, now we got to spend money. So you always want to start with something that they're already sold on. And so in this case for IKEA, it's the imagination gap. Okay, so that's like the first thing. That's the priority driven headline. And then what's the problem statement that falls underneath that?
So the next piece, this is where you are both measuring but also framing a problem around what you can do uniquely, because the way that you talk about the problem is going to layer into the next piece around the recommended approach. So based on how somebody defines, because problems are not objective, they're subjective. You get 5 people in a room, they're going to have a different interpretation. And so the problem statement that you tee up is, for example, hey, these two main priorities are competing, creating a major problem. We're trying to get rid of our massive warehouse. We're trying to fit into smaller urban areas, smaller footprints. And yet we know a major revenue driver for the business is these like complex categories, kitchens, bedrooms, sets. How are those two things going to work out? Well, the answer is they're not, because the metric that we would use to measure the problem is abandoned carts, lost orders in these categories. And so if we can not only, one, talk about the extent of the problem and why it's growing worse as they change, then what we can do is we can frame the problem in a way where now we're always thinking in the back of our mind, hey, we do augmented VR furniture visualizations in kind of 3D models. We know that, right? So the question is, can we frame the problem in a way that relates back to what we can solve, where there's consensus, everybody agrees? Like, yeah, that's the right way to define this problem. People can't picture what these big types of furniture orders is actually going to look like in their house.
How do you recommend best practices or recommendations do you have for folks when it comes to framing the problem? I heard one thing from you, which is take 2 competing priorities that are working against each other that impact that higher level headline. But are there any other best practices for folks that are trying to build this for themselves?
Yeah, so one of the other things that you can do is if you think about, go look at your last 3, 4, 5 deals that you won and look at the different roles or titles that were in those deals from different kind of cross-functional points of view. And then you want to specifically name the role that you don't yet have in the deal and actually write it out and show them a written problem statement. Hey, I heard you mention X. When you think about, for example, customer experience versus the digital or e-commerce team, how would they define this differently? What are they going to say that we don't have written here? Where they would say, actually, I have a different opinion on this. Here's what it is. What would they say? Now they'll answer, they'll take a guess, and then you want to follow that up and say, do you think they'd be open to weighing in on this? Like, could we tag them in and get some direct feedback? And that's how you start to triangulate the definition of the problem.
I think what I'm hearing from you on this one is anytime that you have like a priority or a big decision to make, there are trade-offs that you have to make. That's something that I think Armand and I have learned running a business. And what you're doing is you're actually just presenting the trade-offs that the customer has right now. Where like you gave that IKEA example of like smaller footprint, get rid of warehouse, but also need to sell in this category. And there's a gap there. Like if you're doing this thing, you normally would have to make a sacrifice in terms of sales with these big footprint things. And you have a solve for that so that the trade-off you actually don't have to make anymore. That's what it sounds like you're doing.
Correct. That's right. And you're showing why that is only getting worse if left unaddressed. And this is where when we talk about building the one-page business case is an extension of the soundbite, part of what we led with in the soundbite was what is the change or shift that is already happening inside of the customer's world? Because if we can link back to that, that's where a lot of the deal momentum comes from to say, we have to do something about this now. We're recording this in April, like Q2. You can't let this drag on until December of the year. Because again, like what is maybe 38 million in lost revenue this month? Like maybe we start to add a couple extra digits or even a zero on the end of that by the end of the year.
Nate, when you're uncovering this stuff in discovery, do you usually find the priority first and then try to find problems that support the priority? Or do you try to find the problems first and be like, great, let's try to like put these problems under something an executive already cares about?
So it's naturally going to split or break down by outbound versus inbound. Inbound, you're going to have somebody coming to you and they're going to just lead with a problem statement, ideally, versus like a product feature. If it's a product feature, you're going to talk about, well, what are we actually solving? And then that's where you go back and you ladder up to, well, how do we know that this is the problem to be solved right now? And that's the definition of selling to a priority, not a problem, is like executives leave problems burning all the time. And like Nick, back to your point, like that's their job, is to decide what are we going to ignore and not solve. So that's what you have to do in inbound, ladder up from a problem to a priority. In outbound, you craft the point of view that you lead with and center your first discovery conversations around what is the priority that they're already working on? Okay, now can I figure out if the way that they would agree to and frame up the problem standing in the way is something that we could actually help them with?
So folks, we're going to come back to the business case, but let's dig into that because that's really, really interesting. So let's start with that. Inbound, I understand. Like you get the problem, you unpack it, you're like, great, what are your priorities? Let's ladder these under a priority. Great. Mm-hmm. For outbound, how do you actually start a call or how do you get to the priorities in the first place?
Yeah, so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to begin to look at, and I'm going to start, for example, something that you can do immediately right now is go to Perplexity, go to any type of deep research. By the way, you can do this because it's all public information, right? So pop it right into Perplexity. What is a natural change or shift happening today? Now insert your target account name that might create an opening for me and my offering. Now describe what you do, describe what you sell and who you sell it to. Return a list of 5 items stacked ranked based on 1, the level of priority, and 2, the level of impact on the business. You're going to get back that short list. And from there, what you're going to begin to do is say, okay, well, who do I think owns and is responsible for those? This is where you then map this back on a contact level. So then you can immediately start to drive your first outreach email, your call script, whatever it might be. Maybe you ghostwrite an email for one of your own executives to send out. And so let's say we were doing this, we discover, okay, there's a shift towards smaller format stores in IKEA. So what I might say is I might reach out and say, hey, Javier, looks like there's a shift towards small format stores in 2025, but you're saying a 17% return rate in complex categories like kitchens. Home Depot actually grew kitchen sales online last year, all in 2024. Would it make sense to catch up with your team on how we might be able to close the imagination gap standing in the way with your team? Because you frame that outreach, you're going to get on that first call and then all the way back to your question, because we got to get the meeting and then we can do the discovery. And that's where I think a lot of people go. So next, you're on that meeting. Then you might begin to say, hey, given the shift, I saw there's going to be another 16 smaller format stores opening this quarter. How are you guys thinking about the drop in categories that you can't fit into these stores. From there, you begin to kind of unpack and you talk about maybe how are you already going about this? And you can start to begin to ask a little bit more where you then, because you've led with the priority straight off the bat, then you can validate that that's what they're working on. And then two, from there, you go further into problem framing.
What's going on, folks? There are literally only two things that you need to nail as a salesperson if you want to make it to President's Club. The first is your ability to fill your calendar up with meetings and create new pipeline, aka prospecting. The other thing you have to nail is your ability to drive those deals to close. And since you've made it this far in the video, I've got a gift to help you do both of those things. If you use the code YouTube at 30mpc.com/courses, you'll actually get $50 off our two best courses to help you nail both the creation of pipeline and the closing of pipeline. The first course is called Cold Calls to President's Club. And in that course, we teach you what to do, what to say, and how to sound in every single part of a cold call, from your call opener to how you pitch, to how you overcome objections, to voicemails and gatekeepers and more. The second course is our discovery course, which is focused on how to sell in a way that doesn't feel like selling. And in that course, we teach you how to uncover massive 6- and 7-figure business problems that companies actually want to pay to solve. And we'll teach you the way to structure your calls. We'll teach you the questions to ask. We'll teach you how to get to the decision maker and drive timeline and make discovery something that you know how to do effortlessly. And again, if you go to 30mpc.com/courses or go to the link below and use that code YouTube, you'll get $50 off any of the courses. I will see you at President's Club. For those outbound booked meetings, how much are you balancing the question asking of like, hey, you've got these new stores opening, how are you thinking about this, with giving them a sense of like, what you do to actually solve that problem? Because my guess is you can't spend 29 of the 30 minutes discovering. You probably need to give them a sense of like, hey, here's what we do, how we help. How do you strike that balance in those calls, Nate?
Okay, so this is where we go back to the idea of an approach in the business case. And what you're asking about here is not a specific product feature, but just up one level. Why have you designed your product in a way that you have? So for example, we're all in the revenue business. So let's switch gears and let's talk about, we're now talking with a CRO. Obviously their priority is increasing revenue, but they can do that in a lot of different ways. They can focus on bundling in new products to existing customers. They can focus on new logo acquisition. Maybe there are different segments in new logo. Are they moving up market toward enterprise, continuing to raise pricing, let's say in the SMB? And so there are all of these different levers that they can pull on. And your job is to talk about which of those levers gets the fastest outcome and is the most strategic, and then how you go about that in a way the best approach is not obvious. They're like, tell me more about that. And so now if we shift all the way back toward IKEA, this is where we might talk about maybe they haven't really thought about the difference in, let's call it the generational divide, is like a younger consumer in a college market. They are way more likely to pull the trigger on an online purchase, but the people who spend the most, they're actually more advanced in their career. And those are the people who are used to touching and feeling a product before they buy it. And so now maybe you're talking about how you've created a way to dynamically figure out the age of a shopper and change how you're presenting a product accordingly. Oh, like I didn't talk about the technology behind it or how we do that, but it's like, are you seeing a split or a divide in demographic or age or generation in your shoppers? Which are the highest value segments that you're targeting? Is that the right one? That is all bundled together in an approach, and that's how you do it, as opposed to, especially in an executive level conversation, as opposed to getting into a feature function breakdown.
If the way that you support the priority is not how they think they should support it, how do you challenge that, or do you challenge it?
Okay, so this is the art of framing problems. And a good problem frame does, in fact, change the way that somebody sees and looks at the problem. And the most classic example, have you guys heard of the slow elevator problem?
No, I usually just take the stairs.
Okay, all right, okay. So Nick, Armand, let's say you guys are now in the real estate business. You've taken all of your earnings from 30 Minutes to President's Club and you've bought some residential buildings, okay? So you have a bunch of tenants and they're like, hey, I live on the 10th floor. This elevator is so slow. I'm going to cancel my lease if you don't speed up this elevator. All right. So, hey, there's a loss. That's a problem. Vacancy. You don't want that. Now, what they did is they just framed up a problem. They said, this is an issue. You need to speed it up. Make this elevator go faster. So, Armand, this is what you're talking about. They have a view on how to go about solving this. What if the problem wasn't actually that the elevator was slow? It's actually that they're just really bored and they hate to wait. If the problem is our tenants don't like to wait on a long ride, well, then the solution is we need to entertain them. And so this is actually a very real thing. Next time you go into an old building with a slow elevator, look around and see how often they have mirrors in there. Because what do we all like to do when we see a mirror? What do we do?
I like to make my hair look really nice and
Exactly. Like we look at ourselves, right?
Flex in the mirror.
Exactly. That's right. So somebody could say, hey, speed this elevator up. Now you're talking about a brand new hydraulic lift system. You're getting engineers out. I mean, that's getting pretty expensive, but they're like, make it go faster. So you are completely changing the definition of the problem. If they're still like, yeah, no, it's not that I'm bored, just this is just slow. Well, okay, that's a bad fit deal. Eject out of that as soon as you can.
I feel like so much of this, the crux of really nailing this, is the art of framing problems. And now I know what I need to do if I sell elevator mirrors. What other recommendations to get good at framing problems do you have for folks? Or other examples of framed problems for things that you've sold or helped other people with?
Yeah, so what you're going to do is you're going to go back and listen to, call it your last discovery call. You actually need to take the template that you're going to get in the show notes and write out using that framework the actual problem statement. This is where you might say, every month we have X number of applications coming inbound to us. So write it out. Now force yourself to redefine that problem and write 2 different versions in a completely different way. And this is where you want to go back as you write 3 different versions of the problem statement. This is where you want to say, which of these can we actually solve and which can't we? And this is how you're going to train your brain to begin to think about the link between what are the problems we do and don't solve for. And then what you're going to do is you're going to come back to your customer on the next call, the follow-up call, and you're going to put 2 versions out there. And you're going to say, hey, from our last call, I think what I heard is maybe there are 2 different directions that you're taking this project. Could be path A, could be path B. Which seems to fit more with your conversations, and actually have these written down. Don't just talk to it, because you are going to get way more specific feedback from your customer if it's written out. And this is an actual thing called Cunningham's law. The best way to find the right answer is not to ask a question. See, I see the nods. You guys know this one. It's to write down the wrong answer. So they will let you know. So don't stop at one definition. Put the wrong definition in writing in front of the customer.
So I want to bring this to life with just like one more example for the audience, because I think hearing 2 or 3 different framings of a problem is something that would be really helpful for folks. So Nate, if you pick some product that isn't elevators, any software product, what would an example of like 2 or 3 framings of a similar problem?
Here's an example of a deal that we just signed yesterday. I came into this way late. They had an external RevOps consultant. The deal was pretty much done, but the CRO reached out and said, hey, I just want to kind of double check it. I don't know exactly what you guys do, but I see you're writing all the time. Can you walk me through it? So we got on a call and I asked, hey, like, what are you trying to solve for here? She's like, toward the end of the quarter, our close dates always slip. Our deal slippage is way too high. I was like, okay, so what are you doing about it? She's like, well, we got this RevOps team. They're about to roll out this kind of mutual action plan process and platform. I'm like, great. Is the problem that you're solving for people don't know what to do, and so they're not executing tasks on time? Or is it that they don't actually believe that this is the right thing to do, and so they just kind of don't follow through on the how because they're not sold on the why? And she's like, well, that's interesting. I mean, how would I know? Like, let's talk about that a little more. Now she's at least curious about potentially reframing the problem. And so now we went back and I said, okay, what % of your deals before stage 3 have an executive involved? She's like, almost none of them. Well, could it be that your deals are slipping because you're just getting kicked down the priority list, not because people are confused on project plan, what to do, when, who owns what? They can't get any momentum or sign off to go actually do those things. So then we went back and we started to look more at their funnel data, stage 1 to 3. Who was in those deals? How long did they take to advance stage to stage? And that's where we completely changed. And at the last minute, we signed a highly competitive deal, being in a horrible position to start, all because we reframed the problem. And she realized it's early stage executive engagement, not late stage follow through and project management.
It sounds to me like at the crux of framing a problem is customer tells you something that's going wrong or something that they want to get better at. And then what you're doing is you are presenting multiple reasons why that problem they shared may be happening. In that example you gave, it was like people don't believe or they don't know. And so you gave like 2 or 3 and let them bite on one. They actually didn't know, which was the impetus for you to go deeper and like actually figure out which one was the real issue. Am I getting that right?
So yes, that's right. And one other piece that I want to call out in the context of the problem statement in the business case framework overall. So we've spent a lot of time on framing problems because that is the most important piece. It defines the right approach and then the partner or the product that enables that. The other elements that you want to go back and you want to test for. So when you write out that problem statement, look at it and say, do I have numbers? Do I have a specific number or measure? Do I have names? Who owns this? Who is impacted by this? Next, do we have a date of like, if we let this go on past this date, like it's only growing worse? And then last piece is, do I have red lines? Do I have changes to this problem statement? Those 5 things have to come together to create a tight problem statement. If you're missing any one of those, you are likely going to start to just, one, lose the ability to, everything from maintain pricing late to actually getting the deal moving.
First piece of the business case, priority-driven headline. Second piece is problem statement. We've spent a lot of time talking about framing that problem. The next piece is the recommended approach, and I'm wondering if you could speak to what that should look, feel, and sound like.
Yeah, so this is where you begin to go back to, okay, of all of the different paths that they could take in order to move the priority, increase revenue, is it new sales? Is it existing customers, kind of so on? This is then to build that out. Okay, we've aligned on the category or the lever. Then what needs to be true about a solution? And this is where you bullet point 3 specific things that you can do differently or uniquely to bring that approach to life. People talk a lot about the idea of like a trap setting question or a unique differentiator. This is where it comes out to say, if we agree that's how we solve the problem, this is why us. That's right inside of there, 3 bullets. And again, back to it has to be led with or in the context of the problem.
Okay, so then let's walk through the final 2 pieces and let's talk about what you actually do with this business case, target outcomes and required investment.
Okay, so outcomes. This is where you talk about the return when you follow that approach, and this should mirror or flip the problem statement on its head. So if you're talking about abandoned carts or you're talking about, let's say, an order bundle rate, the outcome has to use the same metrics that you used in the problem and show the gap or the difference between this is where you are today, this is where you will be by a specific date or point in time. And so when you put those 2 things side by side, 3 metrics, current, future, becomes super crystal clear on, okay, what can we expect? And this is the last piece. Why would we make the investment? And where most people go wrong is they talk about the required investment in one of 2 ways. Either one, they only talk about the commercials. They don't think about the project owners, the people time, the energy that's required. And then second, they try to minimize that. And they want to say like, hey, it's going to be easy, fast to get started. And what you actually want to do is you want to be ruthlessly specific and realistic and say, we are not going to hit this outcome that we just talked about above if you're not prepared to make this investment. Because what you're doing is you're making your numbers right before it far more believable when you're just real to say, hey, you're going to see a range or a sliding scale of outcomes prepared on what you are or are not going to invest.
Right. You look like a buffoon if you say we're going to increase your kitchen sales by 46 million and it's only going to take your team 6 hours of work.
Just a code snippet here, copy paste, like that is not going to land.
So Nate, can you orient me with like the before and after this entire page? So like when are you bringing up this page in the sales process and co-creating it? And then what are you doing with it once you have it co-created?
Yeah, so you were starting this in your very first discovery call. So when you're thinking about playing back your recap, just start with a simple priority and problem statement. That's why we led with the soundbite. It's going to sound like 4 sentences, not a full page to begin. And then just like we were talking about, Nick, this is where on your second call, you begin to bring it up and you actually show this in writing. You start to redline, comment. And now this is where as you get after those first calls and you need to start threading others in, this is where the third tip, your forwardable email comes in. You're going to attach this as context inside of the forwardable email so that this starts to make its way around the buying team. And it's going to live on all the way down to 3 other use cases. So 1, you're starting to do a deal review. It's getting late stage. Your leadership's looking at it. This is how you brief them on what's going on in the deal. Second, I was just in a procurement call where we quite honestly on the process, we were tracking way far behind. Our champion brought it up and was like, look, this has to jump the queue in IT tickets. Like we need to get this integration prioritized. And he brought up our business case without me asking. And then third, once you get the deal done, This is how you enable the transition post-sales. This starts to brief customer success on what is the customer expecting, why did they buy. So it starts in your first discovery call and it lives on post-sales with the customer.
What's your take on this versus a long multi-slide ROI deck, NASCAR logos? Yeah, is this like the front cover to that? Or do you think that those should be thrown in the trash and instead it should be simple one-page exec summary business cases?
Simple one-page exec summaries. And like, I am not exaggerating when I say the largest deal for one of our customers that closed, it was $30 million, less than a page, white, black font. That was it. No branding, no logos, nothing. And the point is that this has to look and feel internal to the customer. As soon as you bring out the NASCAR logos, all of the branding, it immediately says, this is a vendor selling me something. And if it's going to the executive, it has to feel internal. So it's counterproductive. Like, good news is, like, you don't have to be a designer because the most effective is just black font, white page. That's it.
How do you reconcile that with customers wanting social proof or wanting, include how it actually works, like links to other collateral or demos?
They only want to know that, and they're asking you those questions when they see the link to their priority. They have to do something about it now. You've aligned on the category of, okay, let's partner with a media company. Sponsorships is the route. Okay, tell me more. And this is where you can think of that one-page doc as it can serve kind of like a Wikipedia page, where if somebody's interested, they could link out to other assets that support and show customer stories. But again, they're only going to follow that link if they're like, oh yeah, okay, I get it. Tell me more.
One pager gets them to actually give a shit. The links can be the supporting documentation.
That's exactly right. You got it.
The one page that will actually get you to give a shit. That's the title of this episode.
I freaking love it.
Nate, the clock is ticking and we got to move to the last question. And so last question is this. We've talked about a lot of best practices that sellers should be following. What is one bad habit that you see a lot of salespeople exhibiting that you think they need to break because it hurts them more than it helps?
The worst is you start to bring the business case when you're getting hammered on pricing. And you don't start to do this early. So of everything that we've talked about, there's this like pressure or this need to show up perfectly polished and pretty and buttoned up. And so you wait until the last minute to bring out what you think is the perfect business case. You need to do this when you don't know. There's a lot to validate and a lot of red lines. So you need to work messy early, fight the temptation to show up polished perfectly because it's going to be too late.
Amazing. Nate, great episode. Thank you for joining us. Everybody stick around for a 60-second recap coming up soon.
Alrighty, Nick, it is time for a 2x2 recap from this episode with Nate Nasralla. What do you have for your 2?
Number 1 is use Cunningham's law to your benefit. Meaning, when you present an early unfinished draft of your business case, that's actually a good thing. You're better off presenting something that is not perfect and letting them react to it so you can build it together than waiting deep into your deal cycle to present something that's perfectly polished, but by that point, it might be too late. Number 2 is when you do share your business case, it actually shouldn't look pretty. You don't need a bunch of marketing images. You don't need like 6 pages with charts and stuff. This should be written in memo format with a 1-page hard limit. No longer. If you need more space for backup for things like appendix stuff, link out to that. Do not send a 12-page Google Doc.
Number 3, the 1-page business case. There are 5 parts of it. Number 1, a priority-driven headline. Number 2, a problem statement. Number 3, a recommended approach. Number 4, target outcomes. And number 5, required investment. And then lastly, number 4, that 1-page business case should read like an internal doc. The moment you start putting your company's branding all over it, all these fancy slides, all these case studies, it starts to feel like a foreign external document. And you actually want this to feel like a document that your champion has written up as an internal memo or an internal business case. Alrighty, Nick, how can people help us out here?
So if you like the concept of this 1-page business case, Nate was kind enough to do a really deep dive write-up of all of the stuff we couldn't cover in this episode for the 30 MPC newsletter. So there's a link in the show notes. If you want to check out Nate's deep dive, go get it. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week on the show.